Hello, I'm Ellie. I work as a social worker in Manchester, and this 10-minute video is part of a series about Beryl and people like Beryl. If you've not met Beryl before, you can find her story in episode 1 and you can meet her here. In this video, we're going to look at the Care Act and executive functioning, which is the brain's ability to act out our decisions and wishes, and it can change lives like Beryl's. The Care Act and this executive functioning wheel can ensure that we provide the right care and support for Beryl to have what she needs and others to elevate from and thrive. So in this video, I'm going to show how this executive functioning wheel can be used as a tool to understand the way in which Beryl presented. Now, understanding executive functioning is really critical to understanding the why, like the way Beryl behaved and lived out her life. Executive function, it refers to the frontal lobes of the brain. They're what controls all human behaviours, just like Beryl's. They're the skills that help us get things done, set goals, make plans and see them through. They're the brain's functions that allow us to have the capacity and the ability to act out our wishes and be who we want to be. When the frontal lobes of executive functioning is compromised, this is called executive dysfunction. It can be really hidden and hard to spot, and it changes actually depending on the environmental, emotional and social context that we find ourselves in. Executive dysfunction, it can impact us all when we're under significant emotional, mental overwhelm and stress. The executive functioning wheel can help us understand Beryl. Let me guide you through how you can use this wheel with professional curiosity. Now, just a quick recap on Beryl. Beryl drank alcohol all day, every day, to cope with the emotional pain from her life that was full of huge traumatic events. Beryl had lived a life experiencing abuse, death, head injuries and violence. And she lived in a really disorganised and chaotic way that made her a risk to herself and others. Over an 18-month period of working with Beryl, the way she presented did not change. It was extremely difficult to understand and communicate with Beryl. Yes, she was often drunk, but there seemed more to Beryl's presentation than just intoxication. She'd never hold on to a topic long enough to register the information. Her brain seemed to be working so fast that she wasn't able to retain, recall, weigh up, or communicate around any decisions. I'm a social worker and I'm really mindful to assume Beryl's capacity under something called the Mental Capacity Act. But this impairment because she'd been drinking, or was it that the executive functions of her working memory was impaired in some way? Beryl had no insight into how she was presenting. She was a proud woman, but she was completely unaware of the feces on her hands and that her jeans had fallen down. Really, was she that intoxicated that she was unaware? Was the self-monitoring and awareness part of her executive function compromised in some way? Beryl was really fixated on topics and she'd struggled to adjust to any attempts for me to change a topic. Was this because she was addicted to alcohol, or was her brain's ability to think flexibly struggling in some way? She would say to me that she wanted to organise and clean her living area. This was really important to her, but she never did. Was this because she was lazy, or did her brain have difficulty starting tasks? Why would she say one thing but consistently do another? She was unable to manage self-care, planning, prioritising. What she needed was absent, apart from drinking, of course. The neglect of self was so high, there was a high risk of her death. She could be highly organised in some areas of her life, but this really was limited to topics that she was fixated on. She'd act really impulsively and she didn't seem to think out consequences of her actions, which meant she would take huge risks, and her behaviour was pretty unpredictable, and it caused quite a lot of fear and apprehension from others, including me. Is this what you do when you're intoxicated, or was her impulse control of her executive function a bit broke? She presented in hypervigilant, dysregulated emotional and aroused states that fluctuated between panic, grandiose, and went from 0 to 60 in rage. This did not seem to be because of her drinking. Behind this bravado, this seemed to be because she was scared. Using this executive functioning wheel, Beryl's behaviours correlated to each of the 8 executive functions of her brain's frontal lobes. And when we look at the long-term presentation, we can often find an understanding of people like Beryl, her executive functioning, and how this influenced how she behaved. It provided a solid documentary evidence base for professionals to consider the use of UK legal powers, the Mental Capacity Act and the Mental Health Act, as supportive structures for comprehensive assessments in Beryl's best interest. These legal powers provided Beryl an environment for her to be at her optimum. Her basic hierarchy of needs met, free from alcohol, intoxication and withdrawal, and surrounded by professionals with the knowledge, skills and resources to unveil Beryl by providing the care and treatment as a platform for her to elevate from. Now, legal powers of restricting a person's liberty are not to be considered or taken lightly. These are often huge ethical and moral dilemmas, and we have clear codes of practice as professionals that are set out for both legislative interventions to ensure any interventions are least restrictive, they're proportionate, and that they empower the involvement, respect and dignity of Beryl. It's at the heart of such intervention, and that any such intervention has purpose and effectiveness. Now, in Beryl's case, we'd exhausted all options in the community to provide the environmental, emotional and social scaffolding to improve her health and well-being and reduce her risks for 18 months to no avail. We were faced with a duty to prevent her death, actually. Her self-neglect had become so acute that we needed to consider the Human Rights Act. Now, in partnership, professionals engaged Section 2 of the Mental Health Act, and during her stay in hospital under the Act, Beryl's presentation, it didn't change. In partnership, Section 3 of the Mental Health Act was considered and engaged, and it was during Beryl's stay under Section 3 of the Mental Health Act that she began to respond to care and treatment. Beryl describes this experience in her words as, "For the first time in as long as I can remember, I feel calm enough to think and make decisions about how I want to live my life, and I'm beginning to understand what I need to help me achieve this." For the first time in Beryl's life, she was unveiled. She was diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, traumatic brain injury related to that significant scar on her head, and alcohol-related brain damage from her years of drinking. Until now, Beryl had lived with limited quality of life, with undiagnosed disabilities and differences that affected her executive functions, and therefore how she behaved. It had been assumed by every professional she had contact with, including me, that her behaviour was because of her drinking. For Beryl, understanding her executive functioning and receiving care and treatment under the Mental Health Act illuminated her hidden disabilities and differences, reflective of her brain's executive functioning. This journey, it provided her a platform to elevate from, to make and carry out informed decisions about how she wanted to live her life and what she needed to make those choices about her future. Beryl now lives in supportive accommodation that meets her environmental, emotional and social scaffolding needs, that optimises her brain's executive functions, and this empowers Beryl to be who she wants to be. Beryl attends AA and she volunteers, and she's inspiring other people that were once like how she was. Beryl feels empowered because she has her dignity, self-worth and self-determination firmly in her own hands. Beryl now has the capacity to act out her life the way she wants. Thank you for listening to me and the people like Beryl.